The light through the chapel windows fell in long, pale columns across the stone floor, and Imogen Lacey stood inside them and thought, "Not yet, not yet. Hold on." 300 guests filled the pews behind her. She could hear them, the rustle of silk, the cleared throats, the particular quality of attention that belonged to a congregation watching something they considered theirs to witness. The Deverell Chapel at Hartmere had not held this many since the old Duke's funeral, and the flowers banked along the altar rail, white roses, jasmine, sprays of orange blossom wired to the candlesticks, gave the air a sweetness that pressed against the back of her throat like a hand. She breathed through it. She had been breathing through it for 7 weeks. The vicar, Reverend Hatch, was speaking. She could see his mouth moving, could hear the cadence of the words without quite catching them. Something about the solemnity of the bond, the duties therein, the obligations before God. Beside her, Caspian Deverell, the Duke of Hartmere, stood with his hands clasped behind his back in the manner of a man who had been taught to stand still in churches before he could read. His profile was steady. He had not looked at her since she had reached the altar, which was not coldness, she had learned the difference, but the particular restraint of a man who did not trust himself to look at something he wanted in front of 300 witnesses. She had noticed that about him during their courtship. At the Countess of Pemberton's garden party, when he had handed her a glass of lemonade and their fingers had touched at the rim, he had looked away so deliberately that she had understood the looking away was the declaration. He was not a man who performed his feelings. He kept them somewhere interior and load-bearing, like the beams of a house you never see but which hold the roof. She had noticed, too, the way he sought her out at gatherings without appearing to. He would enter a room and speak first to whoever was nearest, a courtesy, a habit of rank, but within 10 minutes he would be standing near her, not beside her, not claiming her, but near, the way a compass needle settles toward north without anyone turning it. At the Sefton ball, she had counted 7 minutes. He had crossed the entire room in 7 minutes without once appearing to walk toward her, and when he arrived that he had said something about the punch being too sweet, and she had understood that the something about the punch was not about the punch. Their courtship had been conducted almost entirely in what was not said. He did not compliment her beauty, other men did, and she noticed that he noticed, and that he chose not to compete on that ground. Instead, he asked her what she had read that week. He asked her opinion on the new planting scheme in Hyde Park. He told her, once, that her laugh sounded like a door opening in a house he had thought was locked, and then looked so appalled at having said it that she had pretended not to hear it, which was the kindest thing she could do and also the cruelest, because it meant he never knew she had carried that sentence inside her chest like a pressed flower for every day since. The edges of her vision had begun to soften. She knew this feeling. She had known it for 11 months, since the morning she had fainted in her mother's drawing room, and the physician had been called and had spoken to her afterwards with the particular careful voice that meant the news was not nothing. A weakness of the blood, he had said. A thinning. There were things that could be done. Iron tonics, rest, the avoidance of strain. It was manageable. It was not fatal. But it was real, and it would not go away. And on certain days, when she had stood too long or eaten too little, or the air was close and warm, the world would tilt at its edges and then fold inward like a letter being sealed. She had told no one. This was the decision she had made, and the decision she had kept through the courtship and the engagement and the dress fittings and the 300 invitations sent on cream card with the Deverell crest pressed into the paper. She had told no one because she knew precisely what would happen if she did. Her mother, Lady Lacey, would weep and call the physician back and insist the wedding be delayed. The delay would require explanation. The explanation would reach the Deverell family. And the Deverell family, not Caspian, never Caspian, but the orbiting constellation of aunts and cousins and solicitors who treated the dukedom as a shared asset, would find in her condition a reason, not cruelty, something worse, concern. They would be concerned. They would suggest, gently, that perhaps the match was not ideal, that a duke required a wife whose health was certain, that it would be kinder really for everyone if the engagement were quietly ended. She could not bear kindness used as a blade. So she had managed it. She had taken the tonics in private, locking her bedroom door and measuring the dark iron-tasting drops into a glass of water each morning before her maid arrived. She had rested when she could, sitting down between dances at balls, excusing herself from long walks with a headache that was not entirely invented. She had learned the architecture of her own body, which hours were safe, which positions made the blood rush wrongly, how long she could stand in a warm room before the warning signs began. She had become, in the months of her engagement, an expert in the science of remaining upright. But the chapel was warm. 300 bodies and 400 candles, and the June sun pouring through glass that had not been opened because the groundsman feared rain. Her stays were laced properly, not too tight, she had insisted on that, but the bones pressed against her ribs in a way that shortened each breath by a fraction, and each fraction compounded, and the columns of light through the windows had begun to swim. Reverend Hatch turned to her. She knew what came next. She had rehearsed it in her bedroom, standing before the glass, watching her own mouth form the words. She had practiced saying them steadily, clearly, as though she were not negotiating with her own consciousness to remain present for the most important sentence of her life. "Wilt thou have this man to thy wedded husband?" She heard the rest of it distantly, as though from the far end of a corridor. The chapel had begun to rotate very slowly, like a music box turning on its mechanism. The roses on the altar rail were too bright. The candle flames had halos. She could feel her heartbeat in her wrists, in her throat, in the soles of her feet where they pressed against the cold stone through the thin satin of her wedding shoes. She opened her mouth to say yes. The word did not come. What came instead was a sound, not a cry, not a gasp, but something softer, an exhalation that was also an unraveling, and the columns of light tipped sideways, and the faces in the front pew, her mother's, white and staring, slid downward as though the whole chapel were being poured out like water, and she felt herself going, felt the precise moment when her legs ceased to hold her, and then there was nothing but the sudden terrible knowledge that she had failed to remain standing for the only moment that mattered. He caught her. She did not see it. She would learn it later from Lord Taverner, who had been standing 2 paces behind the Duke, and who described it afterwards with the particular precision of a man who understood that what he had witnessed was not a reflex, but a revelation. The Duke had not looked at Imogen during the vows. He had been facing the vicar, his expression composed, his hands still clasped behind his back. But when she made that sound, that soft exhalation, he had turned before she began to fall. Not after. Before. As though he had been listening to her breathing throughout the ceremony with the same attention he had given to nothing else, and had heard the alteration in its rhythm before it became a collapse. He caught her with both arms. Her head fell against his shoulder. The orange blossom in her hair, she had pinned 3 sprigs above her left ear that morning, her hand steady, her reflection in the glass showing nothing of what she knew, brushed his jaw. Her body, in its cream muslin gown with the pearl buttons running down the back, folded against his chest with the particular weight of a person who is no longer governing their own limbs. The chapel erupted. 300 voices at once, gasps, cries, the scraping of pews as people rose. Lady Lacy was on her feet, both hands pressed to her mouth, and Imogen's younger sister Phoebe had seized her arm. Lord Taverner stepped forward. The vicar dropped his prayer book. 2 physicians who happened to be among the guests, Sir Anthony Marsh and the younger Dr. Campion, were already moving toward the aisle. 300 opinions formed simultaneously about what this meant and what should be done and whose fault it was, and the sound of those opinions colliding filled the chapel like a flock of startled birds. The Duke did not call for the physicians. He adjusted his hold. He shifted Imogen's weight so that her head rested in the crook of his arm, and her knees were draped across his other forearm, and he lifted her, and he turned away from the altar, and he walked down the aisle toward the vestry door. 300 people watched him go. Not one of them spoke. The silence was so complete that Lord Taverner, recounting it later, said you could hear the candle flames guttering in the draught his passing created. He did not walk quickly. He did not run. He walked with the steady, measured stride of a man carrying something he intended to keep carrying, and when he reached the vestry door, he turned sideways to fit through it without adjusting his hold on her, and the door closed behind him, and 300 guests were left standing in a chapel with no groom, no bride, and a vicar holding the rings in his open palm like a man who had forgotten what hands were for. Lord Taverner went after him. He got as far as the vestry door before the Duke's voice came through it, Not shouting, not raised, but with the absolute certainty of a man who was not making a request. "Send Mrs. Dunbar, no one else." Taverner, who had known Caspian since Eton and had served as his second in a duel that never happened, and his companion through a grief that did, went to find the housekeeper. In the vestry, the Duke laid Imogen on the narrow daybed that the vicar used for his afternoon rest between services. It was upholstered in faded green linen and smelled of old sermons and candle wax. He removed her gloves, kid leather, buttoned at the wrist, warm from her skin. He loosened the pearl buttons at her throat, carefully, one at a time, the way a man handles something when he is afraid his hands will shake and is concentrating on not letting them. He found a cushion and placed it beneath her feet, elevating them above her heart in the manner of a man who had read something once and remembered it at the moment it was needed. Then, he sat on the floor beside the daybed, on the cold vestry stone, and he waited. Mrs. Dunbar arrived within 4 minutes. She had been in the chapel's north transept, watching the ceremony from the position traditionally occupied by the senior household staff, and she had seen the Duke carry his bride out with an expression on his face that she would later describe to the kitchen as nothing at all, which was how she knew it was everything. She brought water, salts, and a cloth dampened with lavender. She assessed the situation with the swift competence of a woman who had managed Hartmere for 19 years, and had seen the previous Duke through a hunting accident, a bout of typhus, and the quiet daily decline that had ended in the east bedroom on a Tuesday in March. "Her color is returning, Your Grace." "Good. Shall I send for Sir Anthony? He is among the guests." "Not yet." Mrs. Dunbar looked at the Duke, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, and his bride's hand held loosely in both of his, and she did not ask again. She placed the water and the lavender cloth on the table beside the daybed, and she went out, and she closed the door with the particular care of someone who understood that what was happening in that room was not a medical event, but a private one. In the chapel, Lord Taverner was managing the catastrophe with a particular breed of competence that belongs to men who have spent their lives standing slightly behind more powerful friends. He had been given no instructions, which meant he had been trusted, which was its own kind of instruction. He stood before 300 guests, peers, their wives, 4 members of the House of Lords with whom the Duke sat on the Tuesday benches, Lady Lacy weeping openly in the front pew, Phoebe clutching her arm, and he said the only thing that was true. "The Duke asks your patience. He is with Miss Lacy. He will not be returning to the chapel today." He said it calmly. He said it as though a duke walking out of his own wedding carrying his unconscious bride were the sort of thing that happened regularly and required no particular alarm. He did not explain. He did not reassure. He simply stated the fact and then stood at the front of the church and waited for people to understand what it meant. Lady Lacy rose from the pew and moved toward the vestry door. Lord Taverner intercepted her gently, with the kind of physical courtesy that involves blocking a path without appearing to. He told her that the Duke had asked for Mrs. Dunbar and no one else, and that this was not an exclusion but a boundary, and that when the Duke was ready, he would open the door. Lady Lacy, who had spent 23 years managing a daughter she only partially understood, sat back down in the pew and wept, and Phoebe held her hand, and the two of them waited along with everyone else. What the 300 guests understood, as they gathered their hats and their opinions, and filed out of the chapel into the June afternoon, was this. The Duke of Hartmere, who could have called for a physician, could have handed his bride to her mother, could have stood at the altar and waited for someone else to manage the situation, had instead picked her up and left. He had not delegated. He had not consulted. He had not looked back at the 300 people who had traveled from as far as Northumberland and Cornwall to witness his marriage. He had simply gone, and the going was the whole of his answer to a question no one had thought to ask until that moment. The question was, what would he do if she was not strong enough? The answer was, he would carry her. Imogen woke to the smell of lavender and old sermons. The light in the vestry was different from the chapel, lower, warmer, coming through a single window set high in the wall where the stone was thickest. She was lying down. There was a cushion under her feet. Someone had loosened her buttons. She could feel the air on her collarbones where the muslin had been opened, and for a moment she did not know where she was, only that she was horizontal and that there was a weight against her right hand, Not heavy, not restraining, but present, like a book resting on a table. She turned her head. Caspian was sitting on the floor. His morning coat was creased where her body had pressed against it. His cravat was pulled loose at one side. He was holding her hand in both of his, not tightly. And when she turned her head, he looked at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, and could not immediately classify. Something between relief and fury, and a third thing she did not have a word for. Something that lived in the space between, "I nearly lost you, and I would not have let that happen." "The wedding?" she said. "Yes." "I fainted." "Yes." She closed her eyes. The shame arrived before the fear, hot, flooding, total. She had failed. She had kept her secret for 7 weeks and managed her body through every fitting and rehearsal and morning call, and at the moment that mattered, at the only moment that mattered, she had collapsed in front of every person whose opinion could end her. She had proven the aunts and cousins right without them ever needing to say it. "I should have told you," she said, and her voice broke on the last word in a way she could not control. "There's something wrong with my blood. The physician called it a thinning. It has been 11 months. I should have told you, and I did not because I was afraid you would." She stopped. She could not say it. She could not say, "I was afraid you would let them take me from you, not because you wanted to, but because you would think it was the right thing. And I could not bear the right thing if the right thing meant losing this." He let her talk until she ran out of words, and then he waited a moment longer, as though making certain she was finished. And then he said, "Imogen." She opened her eyes. "I'm sitting on a vestry floor in a creased morning coat with 300 guests in my chapel and a vicar holding my wedding rings. Do you imagine there is something you could tell me about your blood that would make me stand up and walk back in there without you?" She looked at him. He looked at her. Outside, through the vestry's thick walls, she could hear the murmur of 300 people deciding what had happened. And inside this small room that smelled of candle wax and old prayer books, she understood that the decision had already been made and that he had made it before she hit the ground. "We are going to do this properly," he said. "Not today, not with 300 people staring. When you are well enough, and when you want to, we will stand in front of Reverend Hatch and 2 witnesses, and you will say yes, and I will say yes, and that will be the end of it." "And the 300 guests? They watched me carry you out. That was their wedding. Ours will be different." She felt something loosen in her chest that had been held tight for 11 months, not the illness, not the thinning of the blood, but something deeper and older, the particular constriction of a woman who had believed she must be strong enough to deserve the thing she wanted. His thumb moved across her knuckles. Once. A small gesture, barely visible, made while sitting on a stone floor in a vestry that smelled of another man's sermons. It was not dramatic. It would not have been noticed by anyone watching. She noticed. The days that followed were strange and quiet, and nothing like what anyone had expected. The 300 guests dispersed, some sympathetic, some scandalized, most simply uncertain what to make of a duke who had abandoned his own wedding to sit on a vestry floor. The story moved through drawing rooms and dining tables across London with the speed of a stone dropped into still water, each telling adding a ripple the original had not contained. In some versions, the bride had been near death. In others, the duke had shouted at the physicians. In the version that Lady Hartington told at her Thursday salon, the whole thing had been staged to avoid the marriage, which said more about Lady Hartington's marriage than it did about the duke's. Lady Lacy, once she had been allowed into the vestry and had wept over Imogen, and had been gently told by the duke that the wedding would take place when Imogen was ready and not before, took the carriage back to her own house in Hertfordshire. She wrote 3 letters to her sister about the whole affair, each more detailed than the last, and in the third she admitted that the duke sitting on the vestry floor had undone something in her understanding of what men were capable of, and that she was not entirely certain she would recover from it. Lord Taverner managed the aftermath with the understated competence that had made him indispensable to every household he entered. He sent notes to the 4 members of the House of Lords. He spoke to the caterers. He oversaw the distribution of the wedding breakfast, 300 settings of cold salmon and champagne and syllabub, to the Hartmere tenants, which had not been the Duke's instruction, but which Taverner knew he would have given if asked. He handled, too, the more delicate task of managing the Deverell relatives, several of whom arrived at the house demanding information and were given it in the front hall with their coats still on, which was Taverner's method of ensuring the conversation was brief. Sir Anthony Marsh was permitted to examine Imogen on the second day. He confirmed what the Lacey physician had diagnosed: a thinning of the blood, manageable with iron preparations, rest, and the avoidance of prolonged standing in warm rooms. He recommended she eat liver twice a week and take daily walks of moderate length in cool air. He did not recommend she cancel her marriage, and when the Duke asked him, directly and without courtesy, whether her condition posed any danger to her life, Sir Anthony said no, and meant it, and the Duke's shoulders dropped by 1/4 of an inch, which was as much relief as his body was willing to show. Imogen stayed at Hartmere. This was improper. She was not yet his wife and should not have been in his house without a chaperone, but the Duke made it clear that propriety could accommodate itself to circumstance, and Mrs. Dunbar installed Imogen in the south bedroom with fresh lavender on the pillows and a view of the walled garden, and no one in the household questioned it, because no one in the household had forgotten the sight of the Duke sitting on the vestry floor, holding her hand like a man who had found the only seat in the world he intended to occupy. During those 9 days, something happened that neither of them planned and neither of them named. Without the architecture of courtship, the balls, the morning calls, the chaperones, the public performance of becoming attached, they simply existed in the same house, and in the existing, they learned each other more quickly and more honestly than a season's worth of supervised encounters would have allowed. He brought her books from the library without asking what she liked, choosing instinctively. Cowper's poems one morning, a natural history of British birds the next, a slim volume of Italian sonnets that he left on the table beside her bed without comment and which she read twice before lunch. She came downstairs for meals when she felt strong enough, and on the evenings she did not. He had Mrs. Dunbar bring 2 trays to the south bedroom and ate his dinner in the chair beside her window, while she sat propped against the pillows. And they talked about things that people who are pretending not to fall in love talk about: the shape of the clouds, the name of the bird in the garden, whether syllabub was better with lemon or without. They were married 9 days later. Reverend Hatch performed the ceremony in the Hartmere Library at 10:30 in the morning, with the June light coming through the east windows and landing on the carpet in warm rectangles. Lord Taverner stood as witness. Mrs. Dunbar stood as the second, which was not conventional, but which the Duke had requested, and which Imogen had seconded without hesitation, understanding that the woman who had brought the lavender cloth and closed the vestry door had earned her place in this room. Folly, the steward, kept the household at a respectful distance, though the kitchen had been informed and had prepared without instruction a small cake with sugared violets that appeared in the library within 20 minutes of the vows being said. Imogen wore a day dress of pale blue muslin with a cream Spencer jacket, its buttons fastened to the throat. She had removed the orange blossom. She carried no flowers. She stood, and she said yes, and this time her voice was steady, and this time the room did not tilt, and this time the word arrived exactly where she placed it. Caspian said yes with the brevity of a man who considered the question already answered by every action he had taken in the preceding 9 days. Reverend Hatch closed his prayer book and looked at them both with the expression of a vicar who had performed over 200 weddings and who understood that this was the only one he would remember when he was old. The months that followed were the quiet work of 2 people learning each other without an audience. The tonics helped. The walks helped more. Caspian accompanied her on most of them, adjusting his stride to hers without being asked, shortening the route when the wind turned cold, extending it when she seemed strong and the color held in her cheeks. He learned the signs she had learned months ago, the slight distraction in her gaze that preceded dizziness, the way she reached for the back of a chair before she knew she needed it. He learned them not as a physician learns symptoms, but as a husband learns the language of a body he has promised to pay attention to. She learned things about him too, that he read in bed with 1 candle and fell asleep with the book on his chest, that he wrote letters to his tenants by hand rather than through folly, because he remembered their names and their children's names and considered it a discourtesy to delegate what was personal, that he sat in the House of Lords every Tuesday when Parliament was in session and voted with the quiet persistence of a man who believed in institutions even when they disappointed him, that he had been terrified in the vestry, not that she would die, because Sir Anthony had told him she would not, but that she would wake and tell him she had hidden it because she thought he would let her go. "Would you have?" she asked once, months later, in the library where they had been married, with the fire lit and the curtains drawn, and his hand resting on the arm of her chair in the absent way of a man who did not notice he was touching her because he always was. "No, you did not even hesitate. I hesitated for the whole of our courtship. I hesitated every time I handed you lemonade and thought about what it would mean to need something this much. The vestry was not hesitation. The vestry was the end of hesitating." She covered his hand with hers. Outside, the wind moved through the lime trees that lined the east drive, and inside the library the fire settled, and neither of them spoke again for a long time, which was their way of saying everything. The story of the Duke who carried his bride from the altar became, as such stories do, a fixed point in the family's understanding of itself. The version that circulated through the ton was dramatic and much embellished. In some tellings, the bride had been poisoned. In others, the Duke had struck a physician who tried to intervene. But the version that lived inside the house at Hartmere was quieter and truer, and consisted in its entirety of 3 facts. She fell, he caught her, he stayed. Their first child, a daughter they named Elspeth, was born 14 months after the library wedding, in the south bedroom with the lavender pillows where Imogen had spent those first 9 days learning what it meant to be held without being handled. Their second, a son, arrived 2 years after that. Mrs. Dunbar, who had stood as witness and who had by then acquired the particular status of a servant who is also a keeper of origin stories, oversaw the nursery arrangements with the same competence she brought to everything, and Folly managed the estate with the steady precision the Duke required, and the household settled into the kind of order that is not imposed but grown, like ivy finding its own way along a wall. The thinning of the blood persisted. It would always persist, but it was managed and known and spoken of openly, which was its own kind of cure. On the days it troubled her, Caspian cancelled whatever the day held, meetings with Folly, correspondence, his Tuesday obligations, and sat with her in the south bedroom with the lavender pillows and read aloud from whatever book was nearest, which was sometimes Cowper and sometimes agricultural reports, and once, memorably, a pamphlet about drainage that made her laugh until the dizziness passed. Their children were told the story every year on the anniversary. Elspeth, who was serious and precise and had her father's habit of standing very still when she was thinking, wanted the medical details. What had the physician said? What were the tonics? How did the blood thin, and what did that mean? Their son, who was imaginative and easily moved and had his mother's capacity for finding the center of a thing, wanted only one part. "Tell about when you caught her," he would say, climbing onto his father's knee in the library where the marriage had happened, where the light still fell through the east windows in the same warm rectangles. "Tell about when you carried her out," Caspian would tell it. He told it the same way every time, without drama, without embellishment, with the stripped factual certainty of a man who had done the only thing available to him and did not consider it remarkable. "She fell. I caught her. I took her to the vestry. I sat on the floor. But Imogen, watching from her chair with her hands folded in her lap and the afternoon light on her face, saw the part he left out every time, the part where he had turned before she fell, the part where he sat on the cold stone with her hand in both of his and waited for her to open her eyes, and when she did, he did not say, 'I was frightened,' or 'What is wrong?' or 'Why did you not tell me?' He said, 'Do you imagine there is something you could tell me that would make me stand up and walk back in there without you?' That was the version the children loved best. That was the version that was true. They arrive here, like arms that catch before the falling, whenever they are ready.